Howdy, last lesson for chapter 6 with Mrs. Moslick. This is geometry, note 6-6 on trapezoids and kites. Please fill out the front side, pause the video while you are filling it out, and when you are done, go ahead and play the video to check your work. You should pause it. Thank you. Okay, so you should be done now. And so the 6 properties of parallelograms can be in any order, but you must have a picture that corresponds to what your words are. So 2 pairs of opposite parallel sides, 2 pairs of opposite congruent sides, 2 pairs of opposite congruent angles, 1 pair of opposite congruent and parallel sides. The angles that are consecutive or next to each other are supplementary, or in other words, x plus y is 180 degrees, and the diagonals bisect each other. Note that in your picture, these two are the same and these two are the same length, but those 4 are not the same. They're only the same in a rectangle and a square. Which brings us to our Venn diagram. So I should see a word and a corresponding picture that represents the definition. So a quadrilateral, 4 sides. Parallelogram, it's a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of parallel sides. It has 6 properties. So I should write that down too. So 6 properties for a parallelogram. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles, and it has 2 properties. It's that property which is the definition for right angles, and the diagonals are congruent. A rhombus has 3 additional properties. It has the 6 properties of a parallelogram plus 3 more. 3 congruent sides, and then the diagonals bisect opposite angles, and the diagonals are perpendicular. A square, the picture should have 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles, but there are no additional properties because a square has all the 2 properties of a rectangle, the 3 properties of a rhombus, and the 6 properties of a parallelogram. A trapezoid, we're going to find out today, has one property. It's just a definition. It's 1 pair of parallel sides. An isosceles trapezoid has 3 properties, and in addition to the property of a trapezoid. And a kite has 3 properties. We're going to get to that on the back side. So let's go ahead and do the back side. And a trapezoid is a quadrilateral with 1 pair of parallel sides. That is the only property, it's the definition. But I also want to talk to you about something interesting about a trapezoid. If you find the midpoint of each of the non-parallel sides and you connect those 2 midpoints, that's called the midsegment. So the midsegment is this piece, and its length is half of these 2 parallel side lengths. We're going to be using that for trapezoids. We'll also use that idea for a triangle later on. In a triangle, the mid segments of 2 sides, that length is also half of the length of this side and this, which is 0. So it's half the length of the parallel side to it. But that's coming up later on. But let's go ahead in another chapter. So chapter 6, trapezoids. What's important? You have to know the definition of a trapezoid. That is the one property of a trapezoid. But you also have to know the mid-segment formula, knowing that the mid-segment is the average of those 2 sides. And then one last thing is an isosceles trapezoid. There are 3 properties of an isosceles trapezoid. First of all, it has congruent sides, 1 pair of congruent sides. Also, the diagonals are congruent. So same thing with a square and a rectangle. So just because you have a 4-sided figure that has diagonals congruent, you don't know if it's an isosceles trapezoid or a square or a rectangle. So diagonals are congruent. And one last thing is when you think about the symmetry of an isosceles trapezoid, those are the same. These base angles are the same, and these top base angles are the same. So 2 pairs of congruent base angles. Okay, that's all you need to know with trapezoids and isosceles trapezoids. So let's go ahead and try those problems on the back side. So example one, they give us it's a trapezoid and they give us a mid-segment. So we're going to use the formula for mid-segment, which is the mid-segment's length is the average of those two other sides. So we know that if this is the mid-segment, it's required that you show me you know what a mid-segment is. This is the midpoint of this side. S is the midpoint of this side. So show that. You also need to show me that all of those segments are parallel to each other. Okay, so that is worth points on an assessment. Now this is the fun part. It's just the algebra part. QR is 12. UT's length is 22. We want to find the mid-segment. The mid-segment is just the average. You don't have to actually write down a formula with letters. You can just use the numbers on the page is fine. So 34 halves is just 17. So easy problems, just make sure you mark up your picture. So like number 2, MN is the mid segment. This should be line segment, and here this should be line segment. So mid segment means those two pieces are the same, and these two pieces are the same, meaning N is the segment, is the midpoint. So these are all parallel. So what do we know? We know that 30 is the mid segment. So 30 is the average of those two other pieces, 20 plus x over 2. So a little algebra going on here. I would multiply both sides by 2, or you can think about we're cross multiplying. So we have 30 times 2 is 60 equals 20 plus x. Subtract 20 from both sides. You get x equals 40. Fun problems. And then last thing you have to know are the 3 properties of a kite. And so a kite is quadrilateral that has, I don't even have the definition. So again, this is your first property. It has 2 pairs of consecutive congruent sides. Another property, we'll call it 2 and 3, is if you draw in the perpendiculars, you can easily see that those are perpendicular. So diagonals, if you draw in the diagonals are perpendicular. Now, remember another figure where the diagonals are perpendicular, that's a rhombus. So just because we have a quadrilateral where the diagonals are perpendicular, we don't know if that is a square, a rhombus, or a kite. So you can't go forwards and backwards with those. If it's a kite, then we know that the diagonals are perpendicular. One more thing about a kite is there's a lot of symmetry here. So if you folded this over, those two triangles are congruent. So these are, by CPCTC, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Those two angles are congruent. So there's one pair of congruent opposite angles. Have a really good time with the practice on these. You're using the properties, so you have to know all of your properties, and you are applying the properties using algebra, which is, I think, is just a blast. If you're not having a blast, just know that Mrs. Moslick is, and you might want to just send me an email, ask me how it can be more fun. Have a good time. And of course, as always, if you have questions, ask somebody. Have a great day. Bye bye.